Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a video that I have wanted to make since the very beginning. I'm going to be reading the book Lolita and I'm going to be analyzing it from the perspective of someone in Lolita fashion. You may be asking yourself, why am I doing this? And that is because the thing hipster intellectual normie types usually tell me when I say that I wear a fashion called Lolita is, well, if you read the book Lolita, then you would understand its significance more and you wouldn't want to call yourself a Lolita then. But I know that Lolita is just a name, and as much as many people want to make it connect to the book, Lolita fashion is not about the sexualization of young girls. Nor does it have any association with lolicon other than the fact that the two have the same base word in them. And I know this because people have studied the origins of Lolita fashion and how the style developed and got its name. The creators of the style did not intend the clothing they wore to be based on Nabokov's Lolita, nor did the style likely take any direct influence from the novel. And we will talk about that a little later in the video. For now, here's a roadmap for this video. First, I have read this book and I want to report back on some general aspects of the story and pay special attention to what clothes Dolores wears in the book, and if it in any shape or form resembles Lolita fashion that we know today. We will then talk about how Lolita fashion got its name and if I think the name should be changed. And finally, I will give some advice on what I think you can tell randos when you call yourself a Lolita. Also, to avoid this video getting flagged, I'm going to use the acronym PD for a longer word when I speak, but I think you can infer what it means from the context of this video. So let's jump right in. Part 1. The book. Starting off, we are going to be looking at the canonical outfits that Dolores, or Lolita, wears throughout the book. I'm just going to be showing you the exact quotes on screen for reference. Overall, from these quotes, we get the impression that Dolores just dresses like any regular 12-year-old. She's more tomboyish at the start, favoring wearing t-shirts and jeans, and slowly wears more feminine clothing, both as she ages and as Humbert gains more influence over her. From the descriptions I have given, it should be readily clear that Lolita the girl does not dress in any way similar to the Japanese street fashion. The only thing vaguely similar in silhouette is the dresses she wears, but that is so far a stretch, it's basically saying that the entirety of 1950s fashion is referenced to Lolita. I feel like another thing that needs to be brought up is that Lolita is clearly not dressing provocative, if that it has any real meaning. It's literally the most basic outfits, and still Humbert is falling over himself in most scenes talking about how attractive she is. So clearly there's nothing inherently sexual about Lolita as a character. I want to talk about this in how I think people who maybe have even read the book misinterpret this core element of Lolita's character. First of all, Lolita as a word isn't really one that denotes PD tendencies, it's just one of Dolores' nicknames, and honestly is used pretty infrequently throughout the book to refer to her. She's called Dolly or Lo by Humbert just as frequently and in situations where he is fantasizing about her. However, I do want to talk about what Lolita represents to Humbert, being a nymphette. Humbert defines nymphettes as maidens between the ages of 9 and 14 who, to certain bewitched travelers, twice or many times older than them, reveal their true nature to be not human but nymphetic, that is, demonic. So basically, any young girl in their early stages of puberty who he sees as particularly attractive and apart from other children. For us as readers, the way Humbert describes his attraction, which in many ways places the blame on nymphettes for being otherworldly beautiful and seducing him, is clearly meant to be ridiculous and not something we should empathize with. Humbert himself, even throughout the book, realizes his fantasies are wrong and pleads to the jury, aka us the readers, to hear him out. Yet somehow most modern definitions of the word Lolita and nymphette are from Humbert's perspective. They are inherently seen as seductive or sexually promiscuous, when in reality they are children. They do not have the agency in this regard. This is all Humbert and people like him who falsely read their own desires onto the actions of children in order to misdirect any blame onto themselves. What I guess I'm getting at here is that the word Lolita in the terms of the novel's authorial intent isn't a sexualized term, it's literally just a nickname for the main character, and she has this nickname before Humbert meets her and sets his sights on objectifying her. In many ways, the word Lolita has become sexualized through Humbert's viewpoint. It's something that was forced upon it as opposed to intrinsically having that value. Because of this, the modern-day definitions of Lolita and nymphette follow the same perverted connotation because we took them from the definition of the perverted main character, not from the author's or reader's intended perspective. Part 2. Nymphettes. Wow, I wonder what it would be like if there was actually a clothing style based around the character Lolita. Oh wait, there is, and it's called nymphette fashion. Nymphet fashion focuses on developing a full style around the outfits worn by Dolores in the 1995 movie adaptation of Lolita. If I was to describe the clothes in the movie and subsequently the style that has emerged from it, I would say it tends to have a childish, relaxed vibe with some vintage and schoolgirl elements. There are a few YouTube channels based around the style, and probably the one on the forefront is Skylar Rain, who specifically is about promoting the style free of kink associations. I personally think if there's a whole style of clothing based around the actual character of Lolita, and even the members of that community don't consider it a kink or want it to be sexual, then people in Lolita fashion who know that our name has nothing to do with the book Lolita and don't even dress like how their character Lolita does should not feel pressure to protest our fashion style being not a sex thing, because there's no connection at all. Part 3. How Lolita got its name. There have been many articles and blog posts over the year trying to figure out who gave Lolita fashion its name and what was their intention. It's often cited in Moe Matsura's book The World, Myself, and Lolita Fashion that the term first appeared in a 1987 issue of a Japanese fashion magazine called Harajuku. However, the book is in Japanese and I haven't been able to find a translation of it, or if she has a more concrete source in her book for what the origin is. Our best bet is that if it was chosen by a fashion magazine in the early 80s, then it's a form of wasai-eigo, which is when a word is developed in Japan to sound Western. We don't really know when the word Lolita entered the Japanese language, though many do believe it is through translations of Nabokov's novel. And without any concrete first usage, we can't really say what the original namers were going for in assigning the name Lolita to this newly forming style. However, stylistically, Lolita, or Proto-Lolita, existed in the forms of Otome-kei and Natural Kei in the 1970s and 80s, and many of the Lolita brands we know today sold these earlier styles. So in no way was Lolita a clothing style molded after the style of Nabokov's Lolita in her book iteration or her movie versions. As much as people don't want to accept how vague the origins are, if there was any real connections to Nabokov's Lolita, that's what we have. Sometimes things really are that shallow and coincidental. I doubt the collaborators of the magazine thought that when they called this newly emerging style Lolita, that 30 years later it would be one of the most prominent styles of Japanese street fashion, and every 2 years there would be a huge debate on if all of its members were secretly PDs. Part 4. Should Lolita change its name? If it wasn't clear from my take on nymphet fashion, I think Lolita should hold their ground considering really we haven't done anything wrong. It's other people having the negative connotation with the name Lolita and assuming that we are romanticizing the book that are the ones that have the problem, not us. It's very hard to get a real consensus on what the new name for Lolita should be. You want to call it Dolly-kei, and people get mad because they want to push off the living doll association with Lolita that proliferated in the early 2010s. You want to call it Neo-Rococo, but that doesn't really encompass all of the substyles of Lolita, both in where the influence of the fashion came from and where the fashion is heading. I personally don't really like calling it Alice Kei, even if Alice in Wonderland is one of the most symbolic figures in early Lolita, since I don't think it really actually separates us from the implied sexual issues of Alice's depiction in media and Lewis Carroll's original intent. Of the new names, I think Dolly-kei or merging with Otome-kei are probably the most general terms that work well with the current state of Lolita. Although, wouldn't it be funny if Dolly-kei took over, considering it's another of Dolores' nicknames? We really just are in a circle of hell that we cannot escape from. One part about the original naming of Lolita is that once the realization that Lolita had all these negative sexual connotations set in, Japanese Lolitas actually started spelling it differently from the spelling of Nabokov's Lolita. They use a small I sound instead of an elongated ri, so it's Lolita instead of Lolita. At least for issues of websites blocking the word Lolita as is, I feel like if we spelled it with 2 I's or 2 T's, it would at least separate it somewhat linguistically from Nabokov's Lolita. Part 5. What do you tell someone when you call your fashion Lolita? My suggestion above does not have the same effect in a spoken interaction with normies. I guess you could say it's Lolita with 2 T's so that you make a clear distinction that you acknowledge negative sexual connotations but are clearly stating that you are separate from it. I also think saying it's a Japanese street fashion called EGL is another good alternative, since people have at least heard of the concept of Japanese street fashion and they usually won't press much further. Part 6. Fear. I hate having things assumed about me. It's probably one of my greatest fears. So you can imagine the frustration I have that so many people assume that I am condoning of grooming or sexual abuse because they think my fashion is the same thing as the book Lolita. I have had sexual comments made about me well before I turned 18, and I would be hard-pressed to find any young woman in Lolita fashion or not who has not had this happen to them. And I don't think any one of those women, myself included, condone the actions of Herbert taken in the book. Time is a flat circle and I don't expect this issue to go away. I also don't expect to change people's minds with this video, but I do want to have it on record that Lolita fashion is not the same thing as Lolita the book, and liking Lolita fashion does not mean you condone the actions taken by Humbert in the book. Hell, even liking the book or participating in nymphet fashion doesn't mean you condone Humbert, provided you don't glamorize the relationship he has with Dolores. I feel like I should have talked about this more, but really, even if Lolita wasn't called Lolita, I think people would do everything in their power to make it be a sex thing. Just look at ASMR, a name acronym design that does everything in its power to seem as sterile and clinical as possible, but because people think it's weird, it's automatically considered a sex thing. That's the only possible reason anyone can imagine you wanting to do something out of the ordinary, because it's a sex thing. How about it's cute, it makes me feel confident, it's more interesting and builds a community? I think the fact that everyone assumes that fashion subcultures, particularly ones that are favored mostly by young women, are always about sex and attracting men, says more about them than it does the wearers. At the end of the day, Lolita is just a name. It's existed before Nabokov's used it as the title of his book, and it will exist long after the book or the street fashion fade into obscurity. Our associations with certain words change over time. That's just how language works. I find that in most conversations, I'm pretty open with using the word Lolita since that's how I define my fashion, but I realize that many people haven't been able to experience it in this context. With each new round of outrage over Lolita as the name for this fashion, we have a chance to open up this dialogue so that more people learn to use the word for a fashion instead of the name for just a controversial book. So anyway, that's all for this video. I think this is probably going to be one of the longest ones on my channel, so hopefully my computer can handle uploading it without dying. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed learning something new if you didn't already know. If you would like to subscribe to my channel, I would really appreciate it, and like and leave a comment down below. And yeah, I will talk to you all in my next video. Bye!